In 1937, a British engineer named E.W. Mittelheiser filed a patent that almost nobody read. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a complicated machine. It was a clay pipe, buried beneath a planter box, that allowed water to rise through soil entirely on its own. No pump, no timer, no electricity, just the quiet, elegant power of physics. But here's the strange part. He wasn't the first to figure this out. Farmers in ancient Persia buried clay pots deep in desert soil to do the exact same thing, centuries before anyone called it engineering. And the Romans left behind archaeological evidence of subsurface moisture systems that their own descendants simply forgot how to build. Every generation, someone rediscovers this principle. And every generation, it gets quietly replaced, not by something better, but by something more complicated, something that requires buying products, something that creates dependency. This video is about reclaiming that forgotten knowledge, what some communities around the world call the lazy garden, a self-watering raised bed that delivers moisture to plant roots continuously, silently, and without a single moving part. By the end, the physics behind it will make perfect sense. The build will feel surprisingly simple. And the results? Those might just change the way gardening looks from this season forward. 1. The silent enemy in every garden. Here is a question that hardly anyone in the gardening world asks out loud. What actually kills most home gardens? Not drought, not overwatering, not even pests. Inconsistency. Think about a typical summer week. The beds get a deep soak on Tuesday morning. By Friday afternoon, the top 6 inches of soil are bone dry. Then Saturday comes with a guilty conscience and a heavy hose. The cycle repeats. A tomato plant does not want that roller coaster. What it craves, what every vegetable plant craves, is what the soil in a healthy ancient forest always has. Steady, even moisture at the root zone. Not soaking, not parched, just constant. When plants experience those repeated wet and dry swings, something called stress cycling begins. The plant stops channeling its energy into lush leaves or setting beautiful fruit. Instead, it shifts into pure survival mode. Root systems turn erratic, desperately chasing moisture through drying soil instead of building deep, stable networks. And the symptoms? They show up as problems that gardeners have blamed on everything else for decades. Blossom end rot on tomatoes, tip burn on lettuce, spinach that bolts overnight and turns bitter, carrots that crack right down the middle. These are not pest problems. They are not disease problems. They are water delivery problems, disguised as something else entirely. Every time a plant goes through stress cycling, its immune system weakens. And what does the modern gardening marketplace offer? Fertilizers for the stressed plants, fungicides for their weakened defenses, replacement seedlings for the ones that didn't make it. Solutions stacked on top of a problem that could have been prevented at the very foundation. That foundation is how water reaches the roots. And the self-watering bed solves it, literally, from the ground up. But to understand why it works so well, it helps to understand a piece of physics so simple and so beautiful that it has been hiding in plain sight for centuries. 2. The quiet physics behind the whole system. Dip the corner of a paper towel into a glass of water and watch what happens. The water climbs, moving upward, against gravity, all on its own. No one pushes it. No machine pulls it. It simply rises. That is capillary action. The tendency of water to travel through narrow spaces without any help from gravity, and sometimes in direct opposition to it. The same force pulls moisture from the base of a 300-foot redwood all the way up to leaves swaying in the wind at the canopy. In garden soil, the same physics plays out constantly. The tiny spaces between soil particles act as wicks. Water moves naturally from wetter zones to drier zones, distributing itself evenly and continuously through the root zone. No pump required, no timer, no human standing over it with a hose. A self-watering bed, sometimes called a wicking bed or a sub-irrigated planter, harnesses this principle on purpose. At the very bottom of the raised bed sits a hidden water reservoir. Above the reservoir is a layer that allows water to wick upward. Above that sits the growing medium. Fill the reservoir. The soil does the rest, pulling water upward into the root zone at exactly the rate the plants need it, exactly when they need it. The gardener is no longer watering plants. The gardener is simply maintaining a water supply. The living system handles delivery. Now, understanding the physics is one thing. Building it is another. And there is one small detail in the construction that saves the entire system from disaster. 3. Building the foundation, the reservoir and the lifesaver. The construction is surprisingly forgiving. A wicking bed can be built inside a wooden raised bed, a large plastic tote, a galvanized stock tank, or even upcycled styrofoam boxes. The dimensions do not change the physics. What matters is the layering. The bottom 3 to 4 inches of the bed will not contain soil. This is the water reservoir. The simplest way to create it is by filling that space with large gravel, river rock, or pea gravel, washed clean. The gravel creates void spaces that hold water securely without becoming a soggy, compacted mess. It will not decompose. It never needs replacing. In one corner of the bed, resting inside this gravel, sits a fill tube, a simple piece of PVC pipe, roughly 1 inch in diameter, cut long enough to reach from the very bottom of the gravel up to a few inches above the final soil surface. This is the refill port. When it is time to add water, the water goes directly down this tube into the hidden reservoir below, not trickling through the soil from above. But here comes the detail that most first-time builders almost overlook, and it is the single most important feature of the entire design: the overflow hole. At the exact height where the gravel layer meets the soil layer, a small hole must be drilled through the side of the bed frame. Once the reservoir is completely full, any excess water exits through this hole instead of continuing to rise and drowning the soil above. This is the safety valve. It means overwatering this garden is physically impossible. Leave the hose running. The excess simply weeps out the side. A self-limiting, self-correcting design built into the structure itself. With the reservoir in place and the overflow hole drilled, the next step is creating the bridge between the water below and the roots above. And this is where the real elegance of the system comes together. 4. The wicking column and the soil ecosystem. A piece of permeable landscape fabric or geotextile cloth gets laid across the top of the gravel. This barrier allows water to pass through freely, but it stops the fine growing soil from migrating downward and clogging the reservoir over the years. But the fabric alone is not enough. There needs to be a direct bridge, a wick, connecting the water to the soil above. This is done by cutting a circular hole, roughly 8 to 10 inches across, right in the center of the landscape fabric. That hole gets filled with the same growing soil used in the bed above, so that a column of soil sits directly in the gravel, always touching the water. This column becomes the heart of the entire system, continuously wicking moisture upward and spreading it outward through the rest of the bed. Now, here is a mistake that catches experienced gardeners off guard more than beginners. The growing medium matters enormously. Standard garden dirt will not work. It contains too much clay and will compact over time, choking off the very capillary action the system depends on. The bed needs a mix that is highly porous and rich in organic matter. A proven recipe: 60% high-quality compost mixed with 40% coarse perlite or vermiculite. Some growers also add coconut coir, which behaves like a natural sponge, absorbing moisture and releasing it gradually. This blend wicks beautifully, stays loose year after year, and never needs tilling. The reservoir is built. The wick is in place. The soil is mixed. There is only one more layer standing between this bed and a garden that practically runs itself. And it might be the most underestimated layer of all. 5. The protective shield, mulch and thermal buffering. 2 inches of mulch across the top of the bed, straw, wood chips, or shredded leaves. It looks simple. It sounds ordinary. But what this layer actually does is extraordinary. On a blazing summer afternoon, an unmulched garden bed can lose more water to evaporation than the plants actually drink. A proper mulch layer cuts that loss by 70 to 80%. Let that number settle in. 70 to 80% of water loss. Gone. Just from a 2-inch blanket of organic material. But there is something happening below the surface that matters even more. Water has a high specific heat capacity, meaning it resists rapid temperature swings. That hidden reservoir of cool water at the bottom of the bed keeps the lower root zone significantly cooler than the scorching air above. Research has measured root zone temperatures in wicking beds running 3 to 6 degrees Celsius cooler than conventional beds during peak summer heat. A cooler root zone, constant moisture, zero stress cycling. The roots naturally grow downward toward that cool, damp sanctuary, and the plant above stays vigorous instead of struggling to survive. So what happens when all of these conditions come together? Steady water, cool roots, no stress. The answer has been surprising even seasoned growers who thought they had seen it all. 6. What changes when the water never stops? Every cracked tomato in a home garden cracked for the same reason. A dry spell followed by a heavy rain, or an overdue watering, causes the plant to absorb water so rapidly that the internal pressure of the fruit builds faster than the skin can stretch. The tomato splits open. Not from disease, not from bad luck, from hydraulic shock. In a wicking bed, the soil stays at a constant, even field capacity. The plant never suffers a moisture drought followed by a sudden surge. The tomatoes emerge flawless, uncracked, full-sized, and heavier than anything the same variety produces in a conventional bed. Leafy greens tell an equally dramatic story. Lettuce, arugula, and spinach turn bitter in summer heat. That bitterness is actually a stress defense compound triggered by high temperatures and fluctuating moisture. But the wicking bed provides a continuous cooling effect through steady transpiration. The lettuce stays crisp, sweet, and harvestable for weeks longer than it would in a standard garden, even in the dead of July. Carrots grow straight and dense instead of splitting when they hit dry, compacted layers. Herbs like basil and parsley produce for months without exhausting themselves. And this is not theory confined to a university greenhouse. In Southeast Asia, particularly in Vietnam, urban farmers have embraced what they call tui tu num, the self-wicking method, to build micro-farms on apartment balconies using upcycled styrofoam boxes. Entire productive growing systems, for under $5 a setup. A quiet revolution happening on rooftops and windowsills around the world. But the harvests, as impressive as they are, only tell part of the story. Something far more remarkable is happening underground, in the soil itself, that explains why wicking beds actually get better with age. Seven. The living world beneath the surface. A single teaspoon of healthy soil contains more living organisms than there are human beings on this planet. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, all forming a microscopic web of life that processes nutrients and feeds plants in ways no store-bought fertilizer can replicate. But this ecosystem is remarkably sensitive to moisture. Let the soil dry out, and the biological activity collapses. Fungi die back, bacteria go dormant, the nutrient cycle grinds to a halt. Flood it, and oxygen disappears. The beneficial organisms suffocate. The consistent, even moisture of a wicking bed keeps the soil locked in what microbiologists call the Goldilocks zone. Not too wet, not too dry, but exactly right for biological activity to thrive around the clock. Fungal networks expand. Bacteria cycle nutrients day and night. The plants are not just drinking water. They are plugged into a continuous, living nutrient delivery system that compounds its own richness over time. This is why wicking bed growers are often stunned to discover that by the second or third year, their beds become noticeably more productive, even without adding heavy fertilizers. The soil is not being depleted. It is building, compounding, growing richer with every season. Which raises a reasonable question. If this system is so effective and so simple, why isn't it the standard advice in every gardening book and every home improvement store? 8. Why simple solutions stay hidden. There is no conspiracy here, just economics. The gardening industry generates billions of dollars annually. It thrives on the premise that growing food is highly technical, that success requires a steady stream of purchased products. Drip irrigation kits that cost hundreds of dollars and need replacement emitters, cracked UV tubing, and new battery timers every season. Moisture meters, smart controllers synced to weather satellites. Chemical fungicides for diseases that only developed because the plants were stressed from poor watering in the first place. A self-watering bed made from gravel, landscape fabric, a PVC pipe, and basic physics does not generate recurring revenue for anyone. There is no subscription. There are no replacement parts. There is nothing to upsell. So the solution stays quiet. Not because it was suppressed, but because nobody profits from promoting it. Consider the comparison. A drip system runs on a timer. That timer does not know if it rained yesterday. It does not know if the temperature just spiked to 95 degrees. It runs on a schedule, blind to conditions. A wicking bed is autonomous, self-regulating. The soil pulls exactly what it needs when it needs it. No schedule, no override, no failure point. Physics does not require a warranty card. Physics does not break down. Water scarcity and hotter summers are not slowing down. Municipal water costs are climbing. But a wicking bed uses up to 70% less water than traditional overhead watering and delivers better results with less effort. Picture a summer morning. Instead of dragging a heavy, tangled hose across the yard, spending an hour spraying the dirt and hoping the water sinks deep enough, there is a quiet walk to the garden, a glance down the fill tube. Maybe once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, a top-off to the reservoir. Pull back the mulch, press a hand to the soil. That steady, cool, perfect moisture is right there, delivered by physics, not by effort. This is not lazy gardening in the sense of neglect. It is intelligent gardening, designing a system that works in harmony with the way water and soil have always behaved, so the physics of the earth does the heavy lifting instead of aging shoulders and aching backs. The knowledge has always been here. The water is waiting beneath the soil. The only thing left is to fill the reservoir, step back, and let the wick do what wicks have always done. If this sparked something, if there is already a picture forming of a self-watering bed out by the porch, tomatoes ripening on their own while a glass of iced tea sweats in the afternoon shade, then share this video with a friend who deserves to hear it too. Thank you for spending this time with Rooted in Grace. Until next time.